I published a letter, and Elon Musk picked up on it.
Billionaire Elon Musk and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer are embroiled in a war of words over Starmer's alleged role in covering up the grooming gang scandal that's rocking Britain.
These girls were just sacrificed in the name of community relations, but it gets more sinister. Children were being dragged from the school gates into cars, piled with drugs, ganged and trafficked across the country. And when the authorities knew, they covered it up. And when the politicians found out, they facilitated the cover-up.
Do you fear for your life?
So it was a warning. We know where you live. All of that took place, and Greater Manchester Police have been working actively in partnership with senior politicians and the Pakistani gangsters aligned to them, because we now know, Winston, the council set up a child brothel. There are people sat in government to this day who would be in prison.
People don't care about political correctness. What is that? Give a fuck.
Yeah.
What the fuck is going on?
Yeah. I think he would expose the Prime Minister.
To the extent that if you call it racist,
you're part of the cover-up.
You're part of the cover-up, and you're part of the problem.
The cover-up is racist because the victims are white working class. There is a dark history to the emergence of Pakistan as a nation. They set up camps. On what you're witnessing here, genocide. All cultures are not equal.
Before you hear from Miah, I ask, if you want to support this show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, I can have more phenomenal guests like Raja exploring the issues that you want to hear about and that the mainstream media won't touch. If you head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk, you'll get exclusive videos, content, and ad-free viewing. But without further ado, Miah. Well, Raja, thank you so much for coming down to London to speak with me. It's a difficult topic. It's the topic of the rape gang scandal that you have been one of the leading voices on, and not least because, as well as speaking out, you're involved in the inquiry with Rupert Lowe, we're going to get into in this conversation. You have been involved in telling the truth about what's going on, and I wondered if we might start, because you seem like an incredibly brave man. You're from a Bangladeshi Muslim background.
I am, yeah, Bangladeshi and a Muslim, yeah.
And as a consequence of you calling out these grave injustices that's been done to these young women, you have been attacked, I understand, by your own community, but also the police have come after you. Before we get into what's latest since Elon Musk brought this to world attention, I wondered if you might tell me what's going on in your personal life and what have the costs been for you.
I spent 3 years on police bail, 6 months on a house arrest. Multiple times the police have dawn raided my house. You've got to understand, I'm not a criminal. I have no criminal record. I am a decorated individual. I spent over 20 years serving the government, serving this state. So, and in counter-terrorism work, counter-extremism work. That's my background. The former Queen put a medal on my chest. I've sat in rooms with prime ministers, security clearance, all of that. Yeah, that's the world I came from. I came back to a small northern town, Oldham, to raise my daughter, to be part of her life. And my mother had been diagnosed with cancer, terminal. She died a couple of years ago, but I wanted to see her through. You know, I wanted to look after her towards the end of her life and be part of my daughter's life while she was being raised by her mother. And this landed in front of me. I couldn't look away. And I'm very formulaic in the way I work. I come from training in that world. I understand the levers of power. I understand how our system is meant to operate, Winston. And I found, unfortunately, it doesn't operate the way it's meant to operate when you go up against the wrong people. So the police repeatedly dawn raided my home. The Greater Manchester Mayor, and I'll say his name here because he is neck deep in this, a man called Andy Burnham. He's the Police and Crime Commissioner, so he oversees the police in Greater Manchester. They launched an operation called Operation Hexagon. You'll see I name names and a name, I'm very clear on all of this.
What year was Hexagon?
Operation Hexagon was 2019, 2020. Mm-hmm. And Operation Hexagon was set up to come after me and any members of the public in my town who supported me in speaking out against what we all now know as true, which is the cover-up of the grooming gangs. The police repeatedly dawn raided my house, arrested me, trumped up charges, fabricated the evidence. They would never have been able to do what they did if the Crown Prosecution Service was not complicit in this. And only by good fortune, by the grace of God, is how I see this. I ended up having a decent barrister who found me distraught in the school playground when I was picking my daughter up after one time when I'd been arrested, when the local newspaper ran the headline that I'd been arrested as part of a child sex exploitation investigation. So the entire machinery of the state came after me. And we went to court after court after court, arrested repeatedly, followed home repeatedly by gangsters, carjacked at one point, tried to run me over. My 7-year-old daughter, I think she was at the time, in the car screaming. When the police recovered the car, all that had been taken was her lunchbox, a canvas crocodile lunchbox, and the front door keys to my house. So it was a warning: we know where you live, we know where your daughter is. All of that took place, and Greater Manchester Police have been working actively in partnership. And I say this with, you can look at my eyes, I say, and I'm a reasonable man, I'm not crazy in any way. Greater Manchester Police have been working in partnership with senior politicians and the Pakistani gangsters aligned to them, because we now know the grooming gangs were run in parallel with the harrowing gangs who from these communities. We now know this. It's come out. And 6 years of my life has been that.
So, sorry, this is the same Manchester authority, with the Operation Hexagon, which closed down Operation Augusta back in 2004.
So they closed down Operation Augusta. That's where Maggie Oliver was involved. Yeah, Operation Augusta, they shut down. They let 97 members that they know of. So there was more, 97 men. They closed down an investigation when they knew 97 men were involved in the grooming, gang rape and trafficking of children. And to this day, no one at either Manchester Council or Greater Manchester Police, because it was a joint operation, will admit to who ordered it closed down. The minutes of the meetings have gone missing. And we now know, because Maggie Oliver is on record as saying this, so it's not just Raja Miah saying this, Maggie Oliver is on record saying this, that Operation Augusta was shut down, and in the lead up to Operation Augusta being shut down, the Greater Manchester Police knew that there were serving police officers who were members, or at least one serving police officer who was a member of the rape gang. Yeah,
and they said they shut it down because it lacked funding, I believe.
It's nonsense.
In the Channel 4 documentary that just came out, superb, the director was Anna Hall, one of the girls said that one of the perpetrators was in Manchester, was in the police.
Yes,
but it's that's a scandal in itself. But I just want to pick apart this Operation Hexagon. So it was a specifically targeting you.
I sat in a room not too far from a senior police officer, Detective Chief Inspector, I think it was called Jim Faulkner. He was the police officer in charge of Oldham, where where this scandal was playing out. And he told me specifically, Raja, we have had pressure put on us to create a file against you. And that, I later found out that was Operation Hexagon. Operation Hexagon was designed to go after me and anyone on social media, because we're using social media at the time to raise awareness, because that's what we had at our disposal, and to go after anyone who was either encouraging or supporting or amplifying what I was uncovering, which is the cover-up of the gang rape of children in my hometown. And we now know this is 100% accurate, because the government have confirmed it's 100% accurate, because the Home Secretary in January announced a rapid audit by a woman called Baroness Casey into the grooming gangs. And if you look on the terms of reference on that, the town of Oldham is referenced specifically on that. And the cover-up, what I didn't understand fully at the time, Winston, was the way they went after me, and what they were doing was they were protecting senior politicians in the town, because these senior politicians, the evidence, the paper trail clearly shows, were involved in the cover-up that took place. and they knew what was taking place, and they made active decisions as to why they were covering things up. The term they used was maintaining community relations. What we now know what this to mean, as Simon Danchuk, the former Labour MP for Rochdale, has also confirmed, is that this was the trading of working-class white girls to secure votes from the bloc voting Muslim community who had historically voted Labour. Labour rely on the bloc Muslim vote, and they decided that if they were to target these crimes, the grooming gangs, or in any way speak out against them, it would cost them votes. So essentially, children were sold for votes.
Do you have any idea what crimes they were accusing you of? I can sort of understand the way you're describing it is that they have an agenda and they need to close you down. So I can see why they might want to shut you up. But what exactly crimes were they accusing you of?
So 3 times I was arrested, dawn raid. There were 3 separate dawn raid arrests at my house, and through a subject access request with Greater Manchester Police, I managed to get a list of the number of times they tried to arrest me. And there's like sheets of paper, before they couldn't. But the 3 times they arrested me were they dragged me out of my house. First time, 8 police officers came.
This is in the last few years.
Yeah. The first time was because apparently I was a racist. I'd posted something that was racially aggravated. And what I'd posted, Winston, so we're very clear. And this is before October the 7th took place and the latest wave of atrocities, whatever side you're on, the killing of innocent life, I object to. Now, what had taken place was the then leader of the council, a woman called Arood Shah. First time she was leader. She's now leader again the second time. Very powerful figure in the Labour Party. She's the chair of the National Constitutional Committee of the Labour Party. So she just isn't a council leader. She's the chair of the National Constitutional Committee of the Labour Party. She's also the lead for Andy Burnham as his equalities lead. So she's the lead in Greater Manchester on equalities, this woman. Gangster affiliated. Let's be clear again, evidenced. She hangs off the arm of the getaway driver of the cop killer Dale Cregan. So if you remember the man who grenade killed 2 police officers a few years ago, Dale Cregan, the gangster, the getaway driver of Dale Cregan is a Pakistani gangster convicted heroin dealer called Irish Imi, Mohammed Imran Ali. Mohammed Imran Ali, the leader of my council, hangs off the arm of.
So when you say hang off the arm, do you mean they're in a relationship?
Well, she claims he's her childhood friend, but the photographs are of them hanging off each of us. They're seen together. Most recently, and again, this is the council leader driving through town, and it's a poor town, whilst he's driving around in a shiny white Bentley. So this is the nature of what's going on in my hometown. So she had me arrested because I spoke out against my fears and context of this, Winston, is I spent 20 years in counter-extremism and counter-terrorism. That's my background. And I am genuinely concerned about how a new wave of Muslim young people across our country, and as you've seen, I think now, in the way some of the Gaza protests and the Palestinian protests have been politicised, I am deeply concerned about the way in which a young generation is being radicalised and what they want and what they believe they want, and which is to live in parallel states under Sharia law. So I write, it's what I do, and I write to an audience of people who follow my work, and I objected to a protest movement outside the local Elbit factory. So the Elbit factory had a Ministry of Defence contract. It's one of the few factories, it's closed now in Oldham, as a consequence of these protests. And Jewish-owned, I think, is the angle. The leader of the council and the Muslim associates, I call them Islamists, associates took. And they were encouraging these protests where this factory was being attacked and the windows were being smashed in a certain way and red paint was being daubed all over the walls. Now,
This is after October 7th?
No, this is before. So it's been whipped up before. And my objection was, and I wrote about this, I said, well, the smashing of windows in this way is more than just the smashing of windows. It's symbolic. It's crystal knacked. It's trying to, create that relevance. The red paint is to do with the blood debt of Jesus and stuff. There's a whole host of historical meaning behind some of the tactics that these people use. And I said, well, it's like if a sausage or a piece of meat from a pig is posted through the letterbox of a mosque, there's more meaning to it than just, there's more symbolism to it, isn't there?
Absolutely.
So they decided I was a racist off that, and she had me arrested
For objecting to it.
For objecting to criminal damage against the factory, and the racially or religiously motivated criminal, in the way in which these campaigners were going about whipping up anti-Semitism.
Sorry, that still doesn't make sense, because on what grounds can she say you're racist?
Well, the police, when I had this conversation with the police at like 7 a.m, whilst they're asking me, I'm looking at them, and they're getting angry and angry looking at me, and they're saying, well, you might have upset a Jew.
You have?
Yes. I might have upset someone Jewish. So I'm looking at the police officer and saying, how have I upset someone Jewish? Well, you've used the word kristallnacht. Kristallnacht means something far more dangerous. How dare you use that word? So I said, have you spoken to anyone Jewish? No. So how could I have objected? How could I have offended someone Jewish?
But you're calling out anti-Semitism.
Of course. So what then transpired, and this is the crazy bit, they'd never interviewed her, they'd never spoken to her. They then interviewed her and dragged me through the courts. The case collapsed because she refused to give evidence. She ran away. The leader of the council ran away, and because the case was fabricated. But the charging decision, Winston, had to have been took by the CPS. And I wrote to the head of CPS. I came from that world, so I wrote to the head of CPS, and I've got emails confirming that a senior prosecutor in the Crown Prosecution Service was reviewing my file before making a charging decision. They fabricated that case. The second reason I was arrested the first time was a woman called Gail Hadfield Granger. Now, Gail Granger's husband was a man called Anthony Granger that the police shot dead in Salford a number of years ago. Underworld figure from the Salford sort of world. If you come from my world, you'll know what that means in part of the world. And it then transpired she had objected to me campaigning. She is a friend of Arud Shah. She's a friend of Irish Shimmy, the getaway driver of Dale Cregan. She was out campaigning with a red Labour Party rosette, knocking on doors on behalf of the Labour Party. Fabricated allegations against me, saying I'd incited hate towards her or violence towards her on a YouTube video. She helpfully transcribed the YouTube video for the police. Now, the police have a duty to see whether or not what someone else has said I've said is available on a video is actually what I've said. There's no hearsay here. I've said something on a video, like I'm speaking to you now. The evidence it's a primary source, isn't it? The evidence is the evidence. The police never checked the video to see whether what she claimed was true. The CPS never checked the video to claim whether what she said was true. The local newspaper, the Manchester Evening News, ran story after story about me claiming I'm harassing women. All this time was to attack my legitimacy on the grooming gang. So I'm a racist, I'm harassing women. And of course, once that case eventually went to court, Winston, 3 years it took. My mother died before that case went to court. And she refused to turn up to testify against me. She'd gone on holiday. And the CPS wanted her testimony accepted as fact rather than the ability of my defence to cross-examine her testimony, all the way up to court before the case collapsed at that point. And that would not be possible. None of this would be possible without the complicity of both the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. So both have been involved in attempting to discredit me, and all the time the local media in the background, the Manchester Evening News, the Oldham Times, running headline after headline against me. And all of it was to do with attempting to discredit me as an individual. So if they can discredit me, it means that the information I'm releasing regarding the cover-up of the gang rape of my town's children was false, and that the politicians involved had made it up. So that's what their agenda was. So this is a scandal in its own
Yeah,
right.
absolutely. This is why I said you're such a brave man, because but look what happens when someone calls out. I don't know if it's right to say they're your community, because they're not necessarily your community. It doesn't sound like they are, but they are fellow British Muslims.
And this is my viewpoint of this. We are raised to believe. We raise our children to believe that if you see wrong, you speak out against it. You do something if you have the power to do so. I genuinely believe in that mindset. It's how I raise my child. It's how I was raised. Raja, if you see wrong something somewhere and you can do something about it, then you have a duty to do something about it. That's what resulted in me in 20, 30 years of public service. That's the mindset, I came from. My father came to this country, Winston, because he was sent off by his father to serve in the Second World War. The tradition was the eldest son went and served, and he got on a boat in Calcutta, and at the end of the war, it never took him back. It dropped him off in Liverpool. That's the history of my family in this country, and he raised me that way, and I'll raise my daughter that way. That's who we are as people. So we have a duty, and I look at that, and the gang rape is these are racially motivated crimes. I am a trained anti-racist. My first profession, my first career was as an anti-racist. And I'm a trained anti-racist, and I spent a lot of my time working in white working class communities, supporting people to see the shared humanity with others and looking beyond colour and faith, and not discriminating that way, and not judging people badly, and definitely not attacking them or harming anyone else. So if I'm trained that way, Winston, and I see that, and these victims are white working class, and the reason why they've been attacked is because the white working class. The reason why the state has failed them is because the white working class. These are racially motivated crimes. These are victims. And as a person who has been trained the way I have a duty to intervene. Yeah. So I've been framing all of this for the last 6 years or so as racially motivated crimes that are religiously justified by these Islamists. And very few people will go there until Rupert Lowe came along.
I want to come back to a couple of details about your personal story, particularly regarding the CPS and then the local media, Manchester Evening News, for example. But let's get into this at the racial aspect and the religious aspect, because this has come back up in the news. Emily Maitlis, who sort of personifies everything that's wrong with the liberal elite classes, an important part of this scandal over the last 3 or 4 decades has been that if you call it out, you're called racist. This now, it seems to me that the Overton window has shifted to the extent that if you call it racist, you don't only look ridiculous, but actually you look like
you're part of the cover-up.
You're part of the cover-up, and you're part of the problem. So she called the Rupert Lowe MP, a former Reform Now Independent MP, who you've been working on an inquiry, she called him in an interview racist. She explicitly said he's racist for calling this out as Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. So let's dig into whether or not it is, and what's the fact here, because she cited, it seemed like she was cherry picking evidence that that actually the majority of group child sexual exploitation in a certain year, whatever year she picked out, was majority white. But on the other hand, that it is the case that if you look at, let's say, the J report into Rotherham, if you look at testimonies, including the Channel 4 documentary that I recommend all viewers. Actually, it's a harrowing viewing. It's one of the most displeasurable experiences in my life, and I was very upset watching the Anna Hall.
And she took no joy in doing it. You could see it was a part of her life she didn't want to go back to. And she did. She
Anna Hall, yeah.
Anna didn't. And when you look, just also the Andrew Norfolk, who died last week, and the Times reporter who exposed all of this, he also talks about this in the sense of he struggles with it, and I understand, because it's all consuming and it's a dark place. It takes those of us who work in this space into a very dark space. You can't just leave it, and it's hard.
On the racial aspect, then, and it's more than that, because Lucy Powell, the Labour MP, called it
a small trumpet and a dog whistle.
Yeah, that was also a couple of weeks ago with Tim Montgomery, who's a conservative commentator. She called it, for him bringing up the Anna Hall documentary. She called it. She basically said it was a dog whistle, racist dog whistle. So, is it or is it not racist? Or is it wrong? Is it a majority? The perpetrators, are they Pakistani Muslim?
So this form, child abuse, exists in a wide range of ways. Yeah, we accept that. Child abuse can exist in the church, in schools, in the family, all of that. 100% agree. There's a wide range in which children get abused in this country, across the world, and it's all wrong. But this particular element, the grooming gangs, and what Rupert Lowe was trying to convey, this particular element has been ignored or covered up because of the racial dynamics. It is racist. The cover-up is racist.
The cover-up is racist because... Why is the cover-up?
The cover-up is racist because the victims are white working class. If the victims, in this particular type of crime, if the victims had been Muslim girls, if the victims had been African Caribbean children, the state would be all over it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The cover-up is racist because it's inconvenient and it counters the narrative or the utopia of our multicultural society.
Agreed. Yeah.
So that the cover-up is racist, first and foremost. Secondly, these crimes were racially motivated. It's a fact, and it's a fact when you look at the evidence from every angle you want to. Okay, for first and foremost, the perpetrators who have been caught, who've been convicted in the courts, have clearly said that they targeted these girls because they considered them culturally to be inferior Western white girls, slags, whores, asking for it is part of their culture, fresh, white, all of that, So all of that took place. Secondly, it's religiously justified because these men also religiously justified what they did, to the point where in Rotherham, when a group of them were convicted, when they were convicted and they were being led out, they were shouting Allahu Akbar. God is great. They believe what they're doing is religiously justified. Now, to understand this, so first and foremost, Emily's completely wrong. Rupert is right. These are racially motivated crimes. They are racist on a whole host of levels. First and foremost, the state covered them up because the victims were white and the perpetrators were Pakistani and Muslim and from a minority ethnic background, because it countered the multicultural utopia that they want to promote in this country. So first and foremost, that. Secondly, the motivations of the men who committed these crimes, they were racist and they religiously justified their actions. Thirdly, when you speak to the survivors themselves, the survivors clearly say they were targeted in a way because of their ethnicity and their religion, and when they were being raped and gang raped and being abused, when they were being hit over the heads with baseball bats, had various bits inserted into them, being cut. The horrendous testimony that the state, by the way, now is censoring from coming out.
Why is it censoring?
The Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, also Pakistani origin, she's refused the court transcripts.
In the name of protecting the dignity of the victims?
No, in the name of the court transcripts might be wrong, and they're waiting for AI to come along, and it's not in the public interest.
What do you mean they're waiting for AI to come along?
Parliament. She stood up in Parliament and said this nonsense. So there's a state cover-up going on here. It's an ongoing state cover-up going on here, but these were racially motivated crimes. The victims clearly were victims of racism because their testimony demonstrate that. Those who were tasked with intervening and protecting these children also claim that they were prevented, for one, through personal interest, for fear of being called out as racist because of who the perpetrators were. And secondly, because senior officials, not the frontline staff, but senior officials had stopped and intervened and said, no, this is about maintaining community relations. There was a police officer recently, Charlie Peters interviewed him, a guy called John, I forgot his second name, you'll have to excuse me, Detective Chief Inspector. He came to see me in January, distraught. He's from Oldham. He was a retired Detective Chief Inspector, went and worked for an NGO, rescuing children. He followed a grooming gang all the way to a children's home in Bradford, where these Pakistani men were picking up children. The police contacted him. Someone from the council contacted him, Bradford. He went to a meeting. There was a senior police officer there, senior council officials there, threatened him with arrest if he continued, because they had a good thing going on there with the community. These girls were just sacrificed in the name of community relations, but it gets more sinister. It gets more sinister, and Emily Maitlis and the others haven't gone there yet. And this is probably where I take it and I get arrested for. It gets more sinister because some of the most senior politicians in this country led some of these councils at the time. They knew about it and they actively covered it up. They actively covered it up. The paper trail proves they actively covered it up. The leader of my council at the time, a man called Jim McMahon, now Secretary of State, works under Angela Rayner. I think his portfolio includes extremism, Secretary of State for Local Government. And he is neck deep in the scandal.
Would Lord Ahmed be an example of this? So
Lord Ahmed, who was convicted.
He was convicted of child sex offences, but back in the, I think in the 90s actually, but the conviction was more recent, but the offences happened, but it was attempted rape of a boy and rape of another girl.
And this is cultural. And I go back to this, and it's painful because I have many Pakistani friends, and people ask me, "Are you sure you're a Muslim?" I say, 100%. I go to the mosque, people stare at me, Winston, but I make a point of going, and going around different mosques on purpose because I have a responsibility, and people like me have a responsibility to speak out against this and go back into the communities and not be ostracized by them, so they can't disown us. They one of the attempts to try and incite my murder at the time was by associates of the former council leader, the now again council leader Arud Shah, where they shared information that I was a Christian convert and homosexual, trying to disassociate me with the community and also trying to incite violence against me. And of course, the police never arrested any of these people in the way they arrested Lucy Connolly. They're very selective when it comes to what they consider to be inciting violence. But what took place with Lord Ahmed, and I articulate this in the way I try and convey this, there is a dark history to the emergence of Pakistan as a nation. First and foremost, 1947 during partition. When the partition took place, the Islamist clerics incited horrific crimes against Hindu and Sikh women from as young as 9, 10. There were, villages at a time were raped. It carried on to 1971 when Bangladesh was formed and the East and West Pakistan fallout. The Pakistani government strategy was rape genocide. That was a government strategy. That was a state policy where queues of men from what we now know as modern-day Pakistan were lining up to join the army so they could move into what became Bangladesh. They set up rape camps, and they collected children from as young as 9, 10, 11, and over a 9-month period, the official figures, as recognized by the United Nations, is 200,000. The unofficial figures is 1 million. They raped 1 million children and girls as part of rape genocide. Now, why am I sharing this with you? The grandfathers did this in 1947. The fathers did this in 1971. This is cultural. The gang rape of people you consider to be inferior, that is legitimized by the Islamist clerics, is part of the culture. And when they came to the United Kingdom, particularly from the area of Mirpur, when they came to the United Kingdom, they brought that culture with them. And at first, and you'll see online, you'll see the Sikh Awareness Society speak about some of this. First and foremost, they targeted some of the Sikh girls, the Hindu girls, and they also targeted the white working class girls. So this is cultural, this is racially motivated, religiously justified. And as a trained anti-racist, Winston, in any other setting, we would be going into those communities and saying, these beliefs, these attitudes you have is wrong. We do not do this here. This is not allowed. This is not accepted. But we are not allowed. This country yet is not in a space where it is prepared to look at the racist and religious prejudices that exist within some of the minority communities in the way it has addressed racism in the majority white community.
You mentioned a specific region there, Mirpur. why is that region? Because I've heard this often said, it's not just that they're Pakistani, it's from a very specific part of Pakistan. What is different about this region?
The tribal. So it's a very tribal region. It's a very rural, rural sort of part of Pakistan that the time, a land that time perhaps forgot would be, But the Mirpuris, there was a valley. The valley was flooded as part of some irrigation scheme, and the Pakistani government supported that community en masse to basically move to the United Kingdom in the 50s and 60s to work in the mills and stuff. So when you look at Bradford, when you look at those northern mill towns, the entire communities came over. Culturally, in Mirpur, again, these are facts. These are not racist tropes in any way. These are facts. The level of first cousin marriage is very high.
Higher than other parts of Pakistan?
Much higher than other parts of Pakistan. So even first cousin marriage, I think the latest stats I saw was still 50%. Half of people marry their first cousins and marry their first cousin. And this is traditional about keeping the wealth in the family.
It's higher in parts of England now. I think I've
the Pakistani community in parts of England
in terms of cousin marriage.
It's because when you go back to some of these places, as I found out when I went back to Bangladesh not long ago for some work, those cultures move on, but the mindset of people who leave is fixed in a certain time and place of what the traditions are. So people who leave a place,
actually they've progressed more.
Yeah, they progress more where they originally are than the people who've left. But what Mirpur is very specific. Again, it's very specific, very tribal. Tahir Ali, the MP in Birmingham, most recently was campaigning for an airport to be built in Mirpur. Yeah, because the Pakistanis from here actually aren't Pakistanis in the widest context. They're from Mirpur. He wants an airport in Mirpur. And
he was also wants blasphemy laws.
He wants blasphemy laws. Do you see how there's layers to this and how it's all connected? He wants blasphemy laws against the Abrahamic faiths. Actually, what he wants is blasphemy laws against criticising Islam. I'm a Muslim.
So he wants his airport to go back to Mirpur.
He wants an airport. He wants a direct airport to Mirpur. He's campaigning for it. And whilst he was campaigning for his airport, and this is a Labour MP. This isn't one of the fringe MPs. This is not one of the sectarian MPs.
Labour MP in Britain, not in Pakistan.
Yeah, Labour MP in Britain.
Anything to do having a over there.
And he stood on a platform sharing an agenda with one of the sectarian MPs who've been elected on Gaza, who made specific reference to the rape gangs as a far-right conspiracy.
Yep, still. And the Muslim Council of Britain is still doing the same thing, even after everything we've gone through. They're saying, quote-unquote, grooming gangs. Yeah. The alleged, quote-unquote, grooming gangs they did.
These are real, but again, the evidence is there, and this is where it's getting interesting, because I am political. My background is political.
Yeah, you ran as an independent last year.
I ran as an independent. Yeah, I got 2,500 votes. My campaign was entirely focused on the grooming gangs, in terms of national, because I have a responsibility and I'll use whatever levers I can. So what that allowed me to do, Winston, was put a leaflet through every letterbox in my town, because Royal Mail has to deliver a leaflet.
In Oldham.
Clearly laying out the evidence of the cover-up. So this is long before you guys knew about it in this way, long before Elon Musk came along, yeah? We're fighting on the front lines, letterbox for every letterbox in my town, laying out the evidence. The Labour Party lawyers wrote to me, threatened to sue me. I told them I'd see them in the High Court. That was the end of it. So the Labour Party lawyers wrote to me, threatening to sue me for my election materials. It's not a game, Winston, because I know it's not a game. It's serious. My life is at risk here. My livelihood is at risk. Everything I have is at risk here. But I understand the levers that are open to me, so I ran. I ran for MP. I crowdfunded my campaign, and I put a leaflet. A team of mine, volunteers, decent people, former army veterans, pensioners, a team of us went and put a leaflet through every letterbox, laying out the evidence. Labour Party lawyers wrote to me, threatening to sue me, take everything I own. I don't own a lot. I live in a small, modest flat with my daughter, 2-bedroom flat with my daughter. And I wrote back. I said, I'll sue you in the High Court. Nothing.
Yeah,
repeatedly, because it's true. The truth is the truth is the truth, Winston. They covered up the gang rape of children. They exchanged children for votes. politicians knew about it, and when they knew about it, instead of fulfilling their responsibility to intervene, they were part of the cover-up because it was in their interest for the cover-up to continue. And now we've got Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, because Elon Musk forestalled that. Let's be honest, it wasn't me, it wasn't you, it was an American. It took an American to forestall all of that. He referenced the term rape genocide. Rape genocide is accurate because that's what this is. That's where it's come from. Rape genocide was a policy of the Pakistani regime in 1971. What you're witnessing here is rape genocide.
So I want to go back a bit further because a minute ago you said that your second point was this was a religious as well as racist motivation, and of course you're referencing Pakistan, but I'm interested in the role that Islam plays in this. Now, not only, and you've alluded to this, but imams have been found to be encouraging their
historical fact, 1971, historical fact. These are historical facts that the imams preached that the rape and subjugation of lesser faiths, people they considered to be inferior in Islam, was acceptable.
Or infidels, right?
Infidels,
non-Muslims.
People that they considered to be less than, or their Islam was impure. So there's layers to this.
So even if they're Muslims?
Even if they're Muslims, so the narrative was they're not real Muslims. They've been infiltrated by the Indians, the Hindus, so some of the cultural traditions aren't pure enough. You can go and rape them. It's called war booty. It's legitimized in Islam. Yeah, in terms of taking sex slaves during war.
Yeah, so this actually goes back to
it's in the scriptures.
The Muhammad, right?
Yeah, it's in the scriptures.
So we had a guest on recently, Raymond Ibrahim, who's a historian of Islam, and he says that there's a hadith where Muhammad says you can take the yellow girls, and I think referring to the yellow blonde hair or something like this, and it was part of having European slave girls as their concubines, as their sex slaves, and so it really goes right back to that. It seems to me that that's got some sort of role to play in all of this. Do you think I'm right to think that way?
I think you're 100% right to think that way, because the clerics used that narrative to legitimize the rape of children, the rape of young women. You've got to understand these aren't like Rupert. When Rupert and Emily, for instance, had that discussion, Rupert didn't really react. She was getting angrier and angrier.
He totally exposed her.
Yeah,
it was fantastic.
These people, they don't see these as children. So this is distinct. This is very different. Paedophile gangs are attracted to children. Yeah, there's an sexual attraction to children, and they target children because they're children. These men don't target children because they're children. They don't even see them as children, because in the cultures and the religious interpretations they come from, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds are they're adults.
They're fair game.
They're fair game. It's in Iraq.
Oh, it's because they're adults, because as long as they've gone through the period.
Yeah.
Okay.
In Iraq, was it last month, the month before? They've changed the law. You can marry a 9-year-old.
And is that because they've gone to the Muhammad's wife being 6?
So they've gone back to that.
This is Aisha, right?
They've gone back to that, and they've also gone back to not a secular set of laws. It's that thing, isn't it? We evolve as a society. I'd like to think we've evolved as a society from a society that was first and foremost influenced, controlled, governed by a set of religious laws, has been superseded by a society that has been set up that is now governed by a set of secular laws. I think that's how we'd describe Western.
So this is
Western democracy.
What I wanted to get to is why do you as a Muslim reject all of that? But it seems like you're
100%, because the teachings in all of these religious books are contradictory. You can find other teachings in these religious books that'll teach you to teach everyone with equity and humanity and decency.
So how are you, I mean, this is super personal, but how are you deciding which of those teachings have salience?
I believe I have a moral compass, Winston. I believe we all have a moral compass. I believe we all know the difference between right and wrong. You can legitimize evil however you want to legitimize evil, Winston. But I believe inside we all know the difference between right and wrong. Is that not what sets us apart?
I mean, forgive me if this is too prying too much, but if Muhammad is on the one hand saying this and one hand saying that, if he can legitimize it in any respect, doesn't that make you feel differently about Muhammad?
I've not took my faith that far that way.
Okay.
Winston. If I'm honest with you, I look at it this way. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm not the kind of Muslim that other Muslims want to, accept, and maybe there's a weakness in me in that way. But I believe in right and I believe in wrong, and I use that as the first prism before I read any text or interpret anything. And I was always taught, in the end, the conversation will be between me and my God, and I'll let him judge me. I'll let him judge, whether I've got it right or wrong.
Business, what your faith is. And although it's always interesting to hear about people's faith, but the reason I think it's an important question is because this phenomenon exists in Britain, and it seems that if it is indeed a religious, theological, or grounded in theology, we have to deal with the theology to deal with the problem.
100% agreed. And a conversation I had with a friend of mine, a Muslim convert, he's a Christian, he's a white man. I met him last night, and when I was in London, I arranged to meet with him, and this is the conversation we had. The history of the way in which Islam was practiced in the communities I came from was a very soft way in which it was practiced. It was a very, you did good through faith. And then what took place in this country is the growing Islamification, rather than Muslims, the growing Islamification in an Islamist nature, the fundamental nature in which Islam was taught. And one of those watershed moments in my reflections was clearly Salman Rushdie and the satanic verses, and how we saw a different brand of Islam emerge on the streets of our towns and cities. And that was allowed to grow unchecked, Winston. I believe it is counter to our beliefs and our values, and it's led us to where we now are, where it's not just in opposition, it's in conflict. And we have, you either believe in a secular society where we live in, where there are rules made by men, by governments, that define how we live, or there is religious scripture left to, people to interpret. And I don't want to live that way.
Well, we definitely don't want to live in a theocracy, although I would say that the British legal system has come from Christianity. I mean, the beginning of it.
But it's evolved, hasn't it? It's evolved. And I think that's one of the difference between that brand of Islam and how we live. You can say our laws have evolved from Christianity, but when I speak to some of those clerics, some people that I consider to be Islamists who historically have radicalized young people to strap suicide vests to them and go and blow themselves up, it's clear to me that there's been no evolution on the thought process. It's been, it's fixed, and it was fixed then, and it's fixed now.
How much power do those people have those clerics and imams have in Britain? Because I see examples like you, and we've had people I have huge respect for, Muslim people I have huge respect for, coming on this show, including Ed Hussein, Majid Nawaz.
They've been at it much longer than I have, and
they're boys.
Yeah.
And I know some of the Quillian boys who are less public as well, and they really see how they are lambasted and how they are attacked by the Muslims. But you give me tremendous hope, because it shows me, look, here's a patriotic,
absolutely,
who cares, and he's not afraid of calling this out. But what I'm sort of questioning or wondering is, how do we give more voice to this, and how much power do the other side have? And it's the way your whole story in this conversation is the other side have all the power.
The other side of
police,
all
the power. The mosques, the CPS, you've described it, the media. It's
the other side of all the power, because the Labour Party is reliant on an Islamist controlled bloc vote that it secures via postal voting. the other side of all the power. People like me are few and far between. But what I would say to you is the majority of people from the communities I come from want nothing to do with the other lot. But they are powerless to say anything.
And if they look at your story, there'll be even more reason not to say anything.
Why who in the right mind? Who in their right mind would bring this on themselves?
Yeah.
It's not my daughter being raped. I'm sorry, I can protect my family. And Winston, there was a period during the time I was on police bail where the police knew that I was being followed home. They knew, these fatwas had been issued against me. There was a genuine, attempts to try and kill me.
How many fatwas have?
Most recently, at the general election, one of the local mosques, the Islamic centres, issued a fatwa, and then at the small print declared it wasn't a fatwa.
What?
As they get around, you've got to understand the establishment, the police in this country are too scared to take these people on. And they're too scared to take these people on for a number of reasons. And one of them is these people are politically protected.
Do you fear for your life?
I have an arrangement with my immediate family and my close network of friends that should the day come when they've killed me, that they will take care of my daughter. And you can see, this is, and the police are neck deep in this. Andy Burnham and Greater Manchester Police are neck deep in this cover-up. This is the Greater Manchester Mayor. Let me give you an example. He commissioned something called, once he found about this, he launched these assurance reviews, these investigations. So he did everything possible. He launched these assurance reviews that were essentially a cover-up exercise. Limited terms of reference, investigators he brought in.
What year was this?
This was 2021, 2022, yeah? 8 years, sorry. He's been at it 8 years now. His investigators have finally ran away because we've exposed them as charlatans. He's finished his latest review using other people, I think the police. The Maggie Oliver has called him out. So when someone like, I'm a bit more, I'm brash, I'm northern, I'm a working class bloke, I'll tell you to your face what I think of you. People like Maggie Oliver are decent, and
more
nice,
than decent.
and she's
like you, incredibly courageous woman.
But you'd invite Maggie Oliver. My mum would, if she was still alive, would have Maggie Oliver sat there eating samosas, and and they say, why can't you be more like her?
Yeah.
And she's heartwarming the way she goes about this. I'm angry. Because I come from a different place. I've spent my life protecting children. I spent my life fighting extremists, and then I come home and find that whatever else I was doing elsewhere, in the hometown, amongst the people that raised me, children were being dragged from the school gates into cars, piled with drugs, gang raped, and trafficked across the country. And when the authorities knew, they covered it up. And when the politicians found out, they facilitated the cover-up. And the likes of Andy Burnham are neck deep in this. The likes of Jim McMahon, Angela Rayner. Angela Rayner issued on Commons letter-headed paper when Burnham issued published his assurance review in Oldham, as this was like one of the best pieces of work we've ever seen. That assurance review, we've gone through page, and we've exposed it as a cover-up. Nothing short of a cover-up. It didn't even detail how many children were raped. It kept the number secret. One of the case studies it used was something called Child A. This child called Child A contacted me and said, Raja, they've sent me this. Will you have a look at it? Because they've never interviewed me. They've told me they're publishing this. I said, well, what do you want to do? She said, well, will you record me, change my voice and publish my story? I said, of course I'll do that for you. Sweet, no problem. The police visit her and warned her. This is a young woman who's been the subject of gang rape, repeated gang rape. The police knew, the authorities knew. She was put in a children's home. Andy Burnham's small print in his report is this children's home was an innovative solution by the local authority. Very vague, innovative solution. Winston, the council set up a child brothel. They put all the girls together that they thought were, being groomed, and created a specific home and put them in and looked the other way.
And let
all hell break loose. Not in 1950s or 1960s. I'm talking about the 2000s, yeah? And this is why Yvette Cooper, Jess Phillips, the ambassador for women and girls, safeguarding minister for girls, every year stands up and reads a list of women's names who've been, killed through domestic violence. Admirable work, 100%. But here now, where you can do something, Jess Phillips, you write back to my council, not just rejecting a public inquiry, but you're too busy to come and visit the town.
So since Elon Musk brought this to global attention, and there was anyone following the story in Britain knows it's just the conversation is inquiry. We want an inquiry. There have been local inquiries have been proved ridiculous in Oldham.
The cover-ups.
The local inquiry was taken out by the council themselves, who we already knew were complicit in it, and at least one of whom had been successfully charged and sentenced for being a perpetrator. And so the idea that we have, and this is what the promise from the Labour government was 5 local inquiries for which they're going to put £5 million into. They think that that's worthwhile, even though we know what the story is. I wanted to get your opinion on this strategy, what merits it has, if any, and then I want to talk about what you're doing, your national inquiry with statutory powers. So before that, we get to that, what do you take of the Labour government's response?
First and foremost, it's a reaction to Elon Musk. So this isn't something they've done willingly. Elon Musk released information. There was global outrage, national outcry as to what took place. It changed in January. For me, it was just I couldn't believe it. What the events that led up to that, Winston. So I think your viewers will appreciate this. Over Christmas, I was defeated. I'd pretty much had enough. One of my supporters, a man called George Hayward, had recently died. I'd gone to his funeral. He was 97. Most of my supporters were elderly. The man who put the file in front of me, first of all, a man called Warren Bates, had died in April. We were losing. We'd been at this for 5 years, 6 years. I'd cleared my name in the courts. My mother had died. I'd cleared my name. I was out of money. I was out of savings, fighting court case after court case. How can I say this? No heating in the house. I was keeping the heating on when my daughter came, and the rest of the time, that's where I was. And I released we'd forced the council. We took over the council from 47 Labour councillors out of 60. We reduced them to 27. Took us the best part of 6 years to do that, to force this vote through. This vote was, we are writing to the government for a national inquiry. That took us 6 years of campaigning, using everything I knew, everything I'd ever been taught. 6 years, got it to that point, wrote to the government, and I'd got hold of the letter from Jess Phillips rejecting the national inquiry. It was sent to me. I published a letter on January, on New Year's Day. I published a letter. Charlie Peters, great guy. I have time for Charlie, young journalist.
Phenomenal.
Going places, and the world needs more young journalists with a clear moral compass, such as Charlie. He picked up on the email I'd released, shared it on GB News, and Elon Musk picked up on it. And it changed. From the darkest place of I've given up, this is the last piece of document I'm going to release, to within hours, everything changed. That is why Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, went to the Dispatch Box in January to launch this. It wasn't something the Labour Party did willingly, or no, it's something that they've been forced to do. The reaction was these 5 local inquiries, and she made reference to Tom Crowther, the KC, the guy who'd led the non-statutory inquiry in Telford, the judge-led inquiry in Telford. Of course, what that exposed was, again, the cover-up of the Pakistani rape plans. Tom Crowther has since come out to say he knew next to nothing about it, had a conversation hours earlier, and he's been sidelined since. He testified this to the Home Affairs Select Committee. So that when the KC that they're trying to use to front this subsequently testifies that it's been used as a pawn, I think that tells its own story. I don't have to interpret it. You don't have to interpret it. That tells its own story. They've pushed forward this narrative of 5 local inquiries without statutory powers, of Oldham being one of them. Oldham isn't one of them. Oldham had already decided it was going to have a local inquiry if the government said no. I know because we forced through the motion at the council meeting. It was 2-pronged. One was, if the government refuses a public inquiry, then we will have a Telford-style inquiry of our own, where we bring in an independent judge.
So does that indicate that there actually are people on the council in Oldham who are on site?
Yeah.
Or do you think they're just like, yeah, we'll do it, and we'll do another cover-up?
So,
We'll be in control of it.
It's a cover-up.
So you don't have any hope there's anyone on in Oldham?
No. We've elected councillors who are on site. And there are decent councillors.
Labour councillors?
No. Conservatives, independents. We forced this through. We've been taking out Labour councillor after Labour councillor in Oldham. We took out 3 successive council leaders. This is a Labour town. We took out 3 successive council leaders. The last one we took out was a woman called Amanda Chadderton, who stood up in the council chamber and said, you can't say it destroyed their lives, as in you can't say being groomed and gang raped destroyed their lives.
Well, killed. I'm sorry,
killed.
We haven't mentioned this. But some of these girls were
killed,
brutally murdered.
Yeah, brutally murdered. Yeah, you can't say it destroyed their lives. We used that. We campaigned. We removed her. Do you know what happened to her? She was rewarded with the job of campaign manager for Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary. This is how wrong this is on so many layers. So when Yvette Cooper stood up and said 5 local inquiries, one, we knew there was no power. It was just another exercise to cover up, kick it into the long grass, it'll go away. We also knew the 5 million was completely inappropriate and insignificant because in Telford alone, the official reports are it cost over 7 million in just one place. So how can £1 million per location? And of course, it was up to councils to volunteer. Not a single council has come forward and volunteered to be investigated since then, which is why when this issue is repeatedly brought up, well, Oldham didn't volunteer. We forced them. We took out councillors and we forced the vote through.
Right.
But even then, the letter that went from my council. So when we pass a motion, the chief executive of the council, £200,000 a year salary, is instructed to write a letter to the government. Submitted a Freedom of Information request. Can I have a copy of that letter you sent? You meant to write, this travesty in our town, it needs investigating. She just copied the motion that was being debated in its entirety and forwarded it on. So this is the fake liberal metropolitan elite I make reference to, who are ideologically opposed to all of this in the same way as that mateless woman. And they are at odds with what we are trying to do, which is deliver justice. So at every level of government, there are barriers to this. So when Yvette Cooper stands up and said 5 areas, 1, she doesn't know which the 5 areas are because it's up to the councils to volunteer. Secondly, even if they did volunteer, £1 million wouldn't get anywhere. Thirdly, it has no statutory powers. It can't compel witnesses. It can't go after the evidence. It's entirely dependent on the people neck deep in the cover-up to investigate themselves.
When you describe it there, and then I think of this promise from Labour, it seems to me totally tokenistic. They're just doing it to look like they're doing something. But what's so frustrating is that anyone who wants something done about it is not satisfied with what they're offering. So I'm not sure who exactly they're pleasing with this. If it's, let's say it's they're just doing it for political reasons and they don't necessarily, let's say, take the worst possible case, which is that they're just trying to get the story away. This isn't going to do enough to get the story away. And I think evidence of that is that push for a national inquiry with statutory powers has, as we speak now, raised something like £650,000
So
from the public. The public want what you're offering.
Well, two things have took place. One is the inquiry, Rupert Low's rape gang inquiry, doesn't have statutory powers.
Oh, it doesn't?
No, because only the government can have statutory powers.
But isn't it calling for an inquiry?
So what we'll use the inquiry for, what I believe Rupert Low's inquiry will do, will expose the number of places where this has taken place. They talk about 50 towns and cities. But they won't name the 50 towns and cities. They won't list them. Surely we say, here are the 50 towns and cities.
I think Charlie Peters has listed them.
He's listed some of them. It's not comprehensive. I've seen it. I've seen it. But he's done something very clever as well, because what they've also done is charted how they ran in conjunction with the harrowing gangs, and organised crime from within the Pakistani community. So they've done. But
so can you explain then what you're doing with Rupert that's different?
We first and foremost we will go and take testimony from people and share and produce that testimony and share it and say, here you go. You can bypass the government. We know it's happened. The country knows it's happened. We've got a team of people who will support you. We've got the likes of Sammy Woodhouse involved, who will sit alongside the survivors. Give us your testimony.
Sammy is a victim herself.
She exposed the Rotherham scandal. So to be clear of who Sammy Woodhouse is, it was Sammy Woodhouse and Andrew Norfolk who worked together to expose what took place in Rotherham.
Yeah. Okay, so what's key is that it's independent from government, because we can't trust them to have any links
and the inquiry is not the end. The way I look at Rupert Low's inquiry is we need to get to the truth. And this is another step in getting to the truth. 20,000 people donated over £600,000 between them. Unprecedented in this country.
Mm-hmm.
He's using that money, and people like me are not taking a single penny from it, Winston. So we're very clear. All my work is completely
well, yeah,
free.
Mateless. That's important noting, because
she makes a false allegation.
Horrendous woman that she is actually accuses him of taking money when he's put money into it.
He's put money into it. Ben Habib has put money into it. A whole host of people have put money into this. They put aside their political differences. People have and put money into this. I know pensioners who put money into this. I know Muslim friends of mine. Mothers who put money into this, who phoned me up and said, Raj, I'm putting £1,000 into this. I need you to know. So people from across all communities have put money into this, because people from across all communities in our society and all political spectrum are horrified at the truth of. We now know this is a national scandal. We now know. So what we're trying to do is try and map out this scandal, where we come back with enough evidence, Winston, where we pressure more and more. And when people come to me and say, Raja, where is this going to end? The Labour Party will never give what we want. They won't support a public inquiry. And the reason why it's more than just about the block votes and the multiculturalism and all of that. There are people sat in government to this day who would be in prison. Mm-hmm. Which is why I'm chuffed to bits with Maggie Oliver, nice Maggie Oliver, who'll sit and have tea and biscuits in your house and invited on Good Morning Britain and all the other sorts of,
she's a national treasure.
A national treasure.
Yeah.
Well, she's washed the hands of all of them, and has now raised £150,000
to do private prosecutions.
Who's she going to do private prosecutions against? The senior police officers, the politicians. Who else is she going to do private prosecutions against? This is uncharted territory for our democracy.
What do you know about what she's doing? What details is it clear about? Is she going to have victims who have got cases that she's going to put to various people?
She's already got the evidence. She's on record saying she's already got the evidence, and the evidence is compelling. She's already got evidence against police officers who shut down investigations, senior police officers. There's no point. It's like when you go after a drugs gang. There's no point going after the street peddler, because it'll be replaced and replaced. It's not. Yeah. You go after those who are in positions of power, who are coordinating this.
Yeah.
And the ones who are in positions of power are senior police officers, senior officials in the Crown Prosecution Service, and senior politicians. It's that triangle.
Yeah.
I fear for her. If you talked about fearing for me, I fear for her, because she is now taking on the state. Maggie Oliver is now taking on the state. Rupert Low's an MP. You know, there's some protection that comes with being an MP. He's got parliamentary privilege. He's also a very wealthy man. He's told me himself. You know, he donates every. I mean, that was outrageous. What Maitlis said about making money. Rupert Lowe, if you follow his work, he donates his entire monthly salary every month to a charity.
Yeah,
he makes no money from being an MP. In fact, it's costing him money, and maybe he's old fashioned. I've spoken to him a couple of times, and he comes from an era where perhaps he can be manoeuvred in a certain way and things said about him. But I think his heart's in the right place. And when he came across this, like many people who I've spoken to, when he came across this, first of all, he didn't believe what people like me were saying.
Yeah.
Then he was shocked. Shock turns to outrage.
Yeah.
And outrage becomes determination to do something. Yeah, get something done.
Yeah.
And he's got the power to do something. And people like me have a responsibility to support him as much as possible.
Sorry, just on the inquiries, just one step backwards. Do you want there to be a government-led inquiry with statutory powers, or do you think that that's not actually useful? It's better that it's completely private, in the private domain.
So the private inquiry has got to lead to a government-led statutory inquiry of a kind never seen in this country, a Truth and Justice Commission type of approach. That we need to have a Truth and Justice Commission because, Winston, the figures are this. Conservative estimates, 100,000 children.
Sorry, hang on a sec. It's way worse than that.
Conservative estimates, 100,000.
Only a couple of weeks ago, a Conservative MP has come out and said that there's a report of up to 72,000 girl victims in Bradford alone.
I've seen that. I've seen that. It's the small print you've got to look at. It says 72,000 at risk. So we don't know how many of those 72,000 were victims. But the dossier they've handed in to Robbie Moore, I think it was, the Keighley MP. Again, remarkable work. You know, I'm beyond politics on this. If a Conservative is speaking out on this and doing well, I'm supporting them. If Reform are speaking out, I'm supporting them. And if Independents are speaking out, I'm supporting them. I'm beyond the politics of this, Winston. But so 72,000, Robbie Moore has been campaigning for ages on an inquiry into Bradford. The Bradford Council have been blocking that inquiry. And they don't want an investigation. Now, we know if they investigated Bradford, there'd be tens of thousands of victims. And that's
over decades,
Over decades, yeah. But,
so you said the Conservative estimate is 100,000. I forget who it was. It might have been Ann Cryer, the Labour MP, said that there's actually potentially up to 250,000.
She did.
She did say that, right?
She did, and Ann Cryer got demonised as a far right racist, didn't she? You know,
250,000 victims. That's not 250,000 different incidents.
And
each of those girls would have had the fat chance that any of them had only one incident.
So let me quantify this. In Norfolk's obituary, in Andrew Norfolk's obituary, he wrote a story, and it's referenced in his obituary in the Sunday Times. You can read it. There's no paywall on there. It references how one of the survivors he was working with talks about how she was raped by 50 men in one night. Okay, so let's do the numbers. Let's systematically work through this, and it takes us to a dark place, Winston. If we agree, Conservative, that was 100,000 girls. How many men were involved? I'm not interested in just focusing on those who groomed them, who trafficked them, but I know, because the survivors have told me, they were transported to takeaways, hotel rooms, where queues of men were waiting to take their turns, including multiple men at the same time. I can come to no other conclusion, Winston, that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of men in this country from the Pakistani community have been raping white children on an industrial scale. And the term industrial scale is now used in Parliament. The term Pakistani is now used in Parliament. Katie Lamb, I think, I cried. You know, when she did her speech, because it meant I'd never met the young woman, and when she did the speech and she read the testimony out of how this child had been battered with a baseball bat and had a baseball bat inserted into her, and F the white girls, F the government. I cried because they'd been trying to lock me up and put me in prison because I've been saying all along these are racially motivated crimes, these are religiously justified crimes, and they've been taking place on an industrial scale in our country. And we people in positions of power who know better had the responsibility to do so, look the other way.
Yeah.
And whilst our children, Winston, were gang raped, and it's because these were working class. If you ask me, Raja, how do you identify yourself? Before I'd say Bangladeshi, before I'd say Muslim, before I'd say any of those things, I was raised in a working class community. And I have a loyalty and a responsibility to the working class. And it's a shame because it's easy to demonize this as far right and racist because some of this has gone down that road, and it's a shame. And that's why people like me, it's important for people like me to occupy this space.
I totally agree with that. I totally agree. And we just need to show that the problem is if the non-Muslims don't see any Muslims speaking out against it, they're going to lump in all Muslims.
It's easy, isn't it? It's easy. It's human nature. It's easy.
It's human nature, but when you're talking about our nation's children, people don't care about political correctness. It's like, give a fuck.
Yeah.
What the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
And we can understand. It's totally understandable why people go that. That's why I think you're doubly brave. I mean, it doesn't even, as I've already said, that you call this out. Just on the point of how many male perpetrators there are and the numbers you give, I think it's very important to note that as well as for every, so if there's 100,000, let's say conservatives, 100,000 girls victims, and then there's potentially hundreds of thousands of male perpetrators. For each of those male perpetrators, you then have their families protecting them. And this was not only in the Anna Hall Channel 4 documentary Groomed, where she infiltrated some of the WhatsApp groups of the families trying to protect them, but she also showed them protesting outside courthouses, outside councils, I think. And this is something, these are the people you described in this conversation as going after you. So it gets bigger and deeper and deeper.
It gets deeper and deeper. And so one of the watershed moments in this entire scandal was the Rochdale grooming gang. Yeah, and the conviction of the Rochdale grooming gang, and a guy called Shabir Ahmed. He's called Daddy. They knew him as Daddy. The Betrayed Girls, the Free Girls sort of docudrama was based around that. And Daddy was the guy who worked for Oldham Council. They kept it covered up and worked for Oldham Council as a welfare officer. And he sat in his room in the community centre, and the men came in. He had his black book, and he was booking appointments. So you and I were paying as a taxpayer to fund him whilst he was booking appointments with people who were coming in for welfare advice. Actually, they're coming in to book appointments with children that he was coordinating across the country. Now, the cover-up with Daddy, and to this day, the government is still hiding this. And I know because it's from my town, and I've gone and spoken to people, and I forced this out. One, first and foremost, he was a senior Labour Party activist in the town. He was a member of the establishment in the town because he sat on the board of the Citizens Advice Bureau. You only get to sit on the board of the CAB in a town like mine if you're one of the establishment figures, someone from the Law Society, so, someone who was been awarded a freeman of the town sort of status. Those are the people who sit on the board of the Citizens Advice Bureau. Daddy, 9 times the police and the council should have arrested him. In their own report, in their own cover-up report, you've got to go looking, but in their own cover-up report, 9 times they should have arrested him. They failed to arrest him. And who was going and testifying against him all the time, reporting all the time? His daughters. His daughters were the ones who were going and reporting him. Winston. His daughters are now in protective custody. His wife committed suicide in the boating lake of Alexander Park. If you go in the boating lake, it's where you go, and they don't do it anymore. When I was a child, I used to have a rowing boat. You could give 50p and row around it, and we'd throw each other in. You can, even as a child, it only comes, up to your chest. She drowned herself. So there have been people in that community in my community fighting against this all the time. And this is why mateless is wrong. These are not just racially motivated crimes. It is worse. The Pakistani rape gangs are distinct because there is a political class in this country that has actively participated in the cover-up.
So mateless is actually, that's such an interesting point. She's not just doing a disservice to the girl victims, but the very people within the community who are trying to speak out. She's undermining everything that they're going,
She's
hell that they're going
me.
through if they
She's
dare
undermining
speak out about it.
two girls who have had their identity changed or in protective custody or whatever because they testified against their own. They can't live in that community anymore. Do you understand, Winston? They can't live in that community anymore. Yeah. I still, during the darkest moments, I'd put my daughter to bed, and she was young enough where we'd share the bed. I'd sleep with a knife under my pillow, and I'd barricade the front door of my house every night. This is what we are fighting, and the state knows, the police know. The state is an active partner in this, and they're not fighting. This isn't anti-racist. They're not fighting. It's not racist calling this out because there are people from my own community who've been calling this out, who've sacrificed their lives. And
is this?
And how many more? How many more, Winston? That because who have come out and said this because it's covered up, and maybe Rupert Lowe's inquiry will go and look at this, and say, okay, let's look at the people who are calling this out from within these communities.
Are you still going through this since January? Is this still the situation that you're in this state?
2 weeks ago, the police wrote to me, text messaged me to close down an investigation that I reported, where the most recent event was they took a picture of me, some video footage of me, and had me commit some form of homosexual sex act with one of my friends from within the community who'd refused to disown me, and shared that with the WhatsApp groups across all the mosques and stuff. Refused to arrest them, refused to speak to them, said, no, there's nothing wrong with this. And of course, these Islamists, you've got to understand the homosexuality references Islam. And it's not, my position on homosexuality, we live in a liberal Western democracy. If two consenting adults do something, that's between them. It's none of my business, Winston. That's how I see it. And I've got a 10-year-old daughter. People who know me know what my sexuality is, but I'm not going to condemn.
That's not the opinion in the community.
No, and of course, to legitimize it, it means that according to strict Sharia law, people like me should be hung. If I was to be gay, people like me should be hung. If I'm a Christian convert, it legitimizes my murder, and whoever kills me actually is rewarded.
Yeah,
Islamically.
So right at the beginning of the conversation, we talked about the Crown Prosecution Service, and you have said that they were complicit in all of this. I said I wanted to come back to this, and it's doubly important because now Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer was head of the CPS, and he's had accusations that he himself has been complicit in this. The Daily Mail did a big story about it, that there are minutes about when this story came on his table and how he dealt with it. I wanted to know what your thoughts were on the CPS, specifically what they're doing, and Prime Minister Starmer's complicity.
Starmer defends himself by saying when it was brought to his attention, he changed the rules to say, well, these girls should be believed. That's his defense. Well, actually, I would say that's not enough. How many have been prosecuted? How many files have gone forward? We need to see that evidence. We need to see that evidence, and a public inquiry would pull out that evidence, because I'm of the firm belief, and what survivors have told me, is that the CPS have been involved in dropping cases that they shouldn't drop. This is political. This is politically convenient. The Baroness Casey is doing this rapid audit right now. It was announced in January. It's late. I think it's been tampered with, Winston, is I think what's taking place. They're trying to massage the evidence that's coming out. But part of what's took place is Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, has ordered police forces, every police force across the country, to review all the files and say how many cases have they had historically where it was reported to them and they failed to intervene. Surely, Winston, the same should be asked of the CPS. How many cases were put to them where they decided not to proceed with a charging decision? Why are we just focusing on how many cases were put to the police, and why not the CPS? And I think that your answer there is there's a certain Prime Minister sat there. Because if you're the head of the CPS, then with that comes responsibility. I don't care if it across your desk or not. You're the person at the top of the organisation. You represent the organisation. If something goes wrong in the organisation, it's under your watch. And what's his defence? It didn't cross my desk. I didn't know. That's not a defence. If you've got a position of responsibility, and power, and everything that comes in, then you're responsible. And I want to know, and I think the nation would want to know, well, how many cases has the CPS had put in front of them where there were white children who had been gang raped by Pakistani men? Because you can't hide that in terms of how the evidence will be presented to the CPS. And of that, how many of those cases did the CPS proceed with a charging decision on, and how many did they drop? That is statistical. There's a paper trail, and that can be evidenced, and a national inquiry would evidence that. And then I think it would expose the Prime Minister. And that's why that's why this government. Well, it might not happen now, but I'm in Lancashire next week, Preston. I'm in Preston next week. Reform have took over the council there. They've took over 10 councils. I'm spending my time going round to these councils, speaking to politicians who want to help. I take this in good faith. I've never met these people. They want to help. I'm saying, okay, pass a motion. You now control the council. If we believe in democracy, there are levers to democracy. Pass a motion, write to the Home Secretary, volunteering the entire jurisdiction of Lancashire County Council for your inquiry. We keep pushing, we keep exposing, we keep pushing. And if this government doesn't fall, Maggie Oliver, the private prosecutions out of fall, if none of that doesn't fall over the next 4 years, we'll go to the next general election. And I guarantee you this, Winston, on the manifesto pledges of the opposition parties who have a genuine chance, whether it's the Conservatives or Reform, will be this pledge of a no-holds-barred national inquiry. And I hope that you and I live to see the day when those who are responsible for the cover-up of the gang rape of children are put in prison, irrespective of who they are or what positions they held in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask quickly about counter-terrorism, because you spent 20 years doing counter-terrorism.
I did, yes, a lifetime ago. Yeah.
We started recording. You mentioned what you were doing in Manchester, and of course Manchester's the most, perhaps after London, but it again is one of those terrorist attacks that just emotionally hit the country, because it was our daughters again that were killed. And you had insight into that whole experience and the terrorism, how counter-terrorism works. And of course, in this conversation, we've talked about Islamism in Britain as well. And on this show, we've looked into Islamism in the UK and its existence and how it's been countered. And I wanted to, if you could take me into how the British establishment are dealing with Islamism in the UK.
My career in fighting Islamism and what became counter-extremism, counter-radicalisation, whatever terms the government used, predates any of the government strategies. It was started off in 1997. I wrote a piece of paper in 1997, so it's 4 years before 9/11. And I wrote it because I grew up in a mill town. I grew up in a mill town. I saw the Islamism, the wave of Islamism emerging around me, and friends of mine getting drawn into that, and how they were, the term now you use now is radicalized. How they were radicalized. I knew guys who went off to Bosnia, got blown up, all of that, and I saw how it happened. And the government again has been a reluctant partner in trying to deal with some of this, and sometimes they've. How much are they complicit? Let me flip it to, fast forward it to the Manchester Arena bombing. It was the anniversary, I think, was yesterday or the day before, wasn't it? It was the 22nd of May, yeah. So And I was living in Ancoats at the time. So the Ancoats area of Manchester isn't far from the arena. I heard the bang, I saw the helicopter, the helicopters, all of that. And it was Salman Abedi. We now know the guy was Salman Abedi.
So he'd been born in Britain.
His father was from Libya. Yeah. And they worshipped at the Didsbury Mosque. So Didsbury is a suburb of Manchester. And that's where the Libyan community was from. And a few years earlier, my counter-terrorism journey had ended. My work was no longer vogue, and my insights, the way I approached this was very different. My teachings came from a lot of the successful interventions in Northern Ireland, and I spent decades traveling the world, understanding. In the end, Winston, people change themselves. No de-radicalization program works. We can contain, we can manage, and we can try and support people through.
No de-radicalization program can work?
No, it's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It doesn't work. People change themselves.
Well, that's very disheartening.
The UK de-radicalization program, I guess Islamists, was, okay, we'll get some Islamic preachers and they will say, you might have been taught this version of Islam, I'm going to teach you a different one. It doesn't work.
Okay, so in British mosques, and Ed Hussein wrote a brilliant book about the mosques of Britain, but then this is where a lot of the radicalization is happening. How widespread is it through the mosques? And do you see that there's sort of branches of mosques that are doing much to deal with the radicalization?
No.
Because No.
So, and some context again, the Didsbury Mosque, yeah? The imam at the Didsbury Mosque was exposed in Libya, photographed with some guy next to him with an RPG. So the imam from the Didsbury Mosque was off to Libya. Ed Hussein, all of that, that contingent of the Quilliam guys, yeah, they recorded a sermon he gave at the Didsbury Mosque, where he talked about jihad. Brave scholars came forward from the Islamic Muslim community who believed in our values. So this is promoting jihad, as in a violent jihad.
So then that is encouraging. There are imams and scholars coming out.
But this is what happened then. The recording comes out, lands in front of MI5 or whatever, the police. They interpret it, jihad has different meanings. It could have meant an internal struggle. When someone who knows what he's talking about is saying, this is clearly inciting jihad in its violence, so, not some in a spiritual struggle, jihad in its violent sense, the scriptures he's quoting is inciting that. We need to arrest him. We need to do something about him. By the way, have you seen the video footage of him out in Libya? This is before, Abedi came back and blew himself up. And he's from that mosque. That imam is protected. The state drops all his, the police drop all his charges, come up in an alternative scenario why it might not have been.
Sorry, why is he protected?
He wasn't charged. He wasn't arrested. He wasn't charged. He wasn't, none of that took place. He's still there. Abedi, of course, and then they use the official report that came out a few years after the bomb went off, after Abedi said, when that lecture took place, even if it meant that, there's no record he was there because he didn't sign in. Ask anyone who goes to a mosque, and this is official documents, by the way, I'm not making any of this up. Ask anyone who goes to a mosque if they've ever signed into a mosque. I'm 52 years old. I've never signed into any mosque I've been into in any part of the world. You don't sign into a mosque. The state, the UK government are part of the cover-up of what went on at Manchester Arena, and the part of the cover-up because of what went on at Manchester Arena because the UK government were actively working in recruiting young men, supporting them to go to Libya to take out Gaddafi and fight alongside the Al-Nusra Front. The Al-Nusra Front is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, and these men, when they went and operated alongside Al-Qaeda, the Al-Nusra Front, were radicalized there, and that's how he came back here and blew this up, and no one wants to talk about that.
I actually didn't know that. So Abedi was a government asset.
Abedi's father is a government asset.
That the British sent...
So the British have been...
He didn't go on his own accord. He went...
There's public documents that will show MI5 cleared the way for these guys to go overseas.
So they went
through.
on their own accord, but MI5 was like,
and facilitate. They
because they wanted Gaddafi out.
Yeah. And they were going for weekend camps. The Libyan lads were going for the weekend or for weeks. You know, like you'd gone tour around Europe or something on the back of a bus for a holiday. They were going, fought and come back. Shot some rocket propelled grenades.
Holiday jihad.
Yeah, holiday jihad. This, go and look at it. And I fell out. I fell out with the government on this in the end. In the lead up to this, because we were picking and choosing when we were fighting these organisations and when we decided they were our allies, depending on on what the foreign affairs looked like.
At what?
Because these people are never our allies, Winston. These people want to see our destruction.
Do you think the government have changed? Are you convinced that approach from that period is different now? That would such a decision like that be allowed now? Shamima Begum would be an example of
Shamima Begum, when she was took out this country. You do again. It's covered up. She was referred to a PREVENT program. So PREVENT is the de-radicalisation program that the government had, and it's been criticised.
To say the least.
Yeah, to say the least. It's failed.
Program.
Useless.
Useless.
Useless. Yeah. So, but go and have a look. I think Private Eye did an investigation into it. Shamima Begum referred to a PREVENT program. The PREVENT program had been infiltrated.
Yeah, long infiltrated. PREVENT was set up after the 2005 tube bombings.
The 7/7 bombings.
7/7 bombings. And more recently, in 2024, even last year, it was from King's College, reported they'd been in a PREVENT, and they were talking about, if you talk about Islamism, the Muslim attendees felt like it was racist, and they spent all their time talking about Joe Rogan and Douglas Murray and the quote unquote far right. To PREVENT is an utter disgrace.
Because we will not address, it goes back to this fundamental issue. It's the same with the grooming gang, same with this, and Islamism. We will not accept where there are prejudices within our minority communities and views within our minority communities that counter our liberal Western democracy and our values.
Yeah.
And we don't have the courage or the conviction to face up to that and address it. And I go back to the likes of Mateless.
Yeah.
Because this is ideological for them, Winston. This isn't about the facts on the ground and the reality. This is ideological.
It's going to be very hard for them to come around because
the
whole worldview would be shattered.
Yeah.
But just in terms of painting sort of a hopeful vision for the future, I'd love you to tell me whether you think I'm right or wrong about this. But it seems to me what we've described is actually, this is a pretty deep, widespread problem in Britain. But it's my opinion that if we had proper law and order and actually punished these perpetrators, and even let's say British Muslims who might be susceptible or interested in the ideas, if they actually feared
the rule of law,
then they might actually respect it. And the problem is there's not really much indication that they do fear the rule of law, not least because we're not doing anything about it. They're getting away with it. Do you think I'm right to think that? That
protected.
Because another reason I say that is because a big part of the conversation is now turning to, and I would say this is on the hard right, is remigration. And I don't mean that they're talking about deporting illegals. I think that's perfectly legitimate. I think that they're talking about, if you go really to the far right, they're talking about deporting essentially British Muslims.
I have conversations with friends of mine who've ended up in what we call the hard right, and they've gone on a journey where they've got to that space. And they are friends of mine. I mean, people like Nick Tanconi, the UKIP guy, friend of mine. I have no qualm saying he's a friend of mine. I don't agree with him politically and a whole host of things. And he talks about remigration. He's one of them who talks about remigration. And I look at remigration, and you've got to understand, why have we ended up there? And we've ended up there because actually the checks and balances that were meant to be in place have never been implemented. And it's driven people to a position of remigration. What do we mean by remigration? Is we deport those people who have come to our country and have broken our laws, and we don't want them here. You know,
No, they go much further than that.
But so
that you'd get pulled out, and, even though you were born here.
Yeah, this is the thing.
And you've
so
been here generations.
how far do you go? So my thing is, okay, if you're foreign born national, you know, let's look at it and let's look at where we agree. If you're a foreign born national and you've committed a crime here,
off you fuck.
Yeah, why should you be here?
That's not contentious.
I don't think anyone's saying that's, you know, but there's layers to this, isn't there?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, there's that. Okay, if you've earned citizenship or you've got right to leave here, or, you know, remain here, but where do you end? Where does it go? And I would argue with you, and I've had people say to me, "Well, you're going, mate. You know, you're you know, even though you were born here, you know, you're ethnically from somewhere else. You're not pure white." But all I can say to that, Winston, is people have ended up in those extreme viewpoints because we have failed them. I'm not going to condemn people who've ended up in that space because I understand the frustration of many. And of course, there will always be a small number who believe that irrespective. In any society, there's a small number of, you know, I'd like to believe there's only a small number of genuine extremists who would say, look at me and say, you don't belong here. But my experience of this being my home is that the vast majority of people are not like that. The vast majority of people want to find their way to live together.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of people would agree that there are people who abuse our freedoms, and we as a society need to find a way of safeguarding our way of life, because if we don't safeguard our way of life, we know what will happen because you've seen it elsewhere. And on that, we're on the same page. So I agree with you on the challenge of remigration and where it ends up. But at the same time, I'd say a lot of the people I know who've ended up there didn't start there, Winston. They've gone on a journey. What do you say to a father of a child who's been repeatedly gang raped, and he turned up and he was arrested? And if he's ended up in that space, who am I to judge him? Can you imagine how you would behave if that was you? Who am I to judge someone who looks around their community and the place they called home and seen it's completely transformed? And not just with other people coming in, but where they are discriminated against, where they are treated inferior, where they know they no longer matter. We've not got to this place overnight. You know, it's not in the nature of the United Kingdom to be an extreme country. We're not that. And more people who've been drawn towards those spaces is because the state has failed them. And it's because we're peddling a lie, Winston. And that lie is multiculturalism works. We're a multicultural society because, and I've got to this journey and this realization myself on this journey, all cultures are not equal, Winston.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned that. All cultures are not equal. And we need to value and treasure ours.
Raja, I don't know quite how to describe that, but I'm very moved by this conversation for several reasons. And one of those is your bravery, as I've said a couple of times. And God protect you.
Thank you.
And thank you for speaking with me. Before I ask you where people might find you, how they can support you, how they can support the inquiry you're doing with Rupert, is there any loose ends that you want tied up from this conversation?
I think when I share this story and it takes us to a dark place and you know it's like we lose hope. You shouldn't lose hope. We are winning. The fact that you and I are having this conversation, the fact that this nation is having this conversation, the fact that we are where we are now compared to where we've ever been before, this is night and day, Winston. We are winning. We are on the verge of winning. We're on the verge of winning. We are on the verge of ending this journey that our nation has been going on since the Second World War, and it matters. And in the end, all I've ever found is it's ordinary people who make the difference. And people are listening. You need to understand this. You are the difference, and it's what the state fears. It's what they fear the most. The fear that you will care, and then you will look and think, actually, I can make a difference. And I'd say that I can talk to you about my web pages and all the rest of it, but people who follow me will find me. It's and I'm sure you'll share that content, and I'll share it. But most of all take from this. You matter and you can make a difference and you are the difference. And that's why they lock me up. That's why they've got Lucy Connolly in prison. That's why, because they know ordinary people can make a difference. And they want to put the fear of God into you. And what you need to understand is they fear us more than anything.
Yeah. Well, Raja, thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me.
A real, very special conversation. And I'll certainly be supporting you. I've been on your website. You've got a blog where you also
redwallandtherabble.co.uk. So they called us rabble. They called us, the Red Wall is a Labour area. And when they were demonising us, the working class people that supported me, they described repeatedly as rabble. So we took the name rabble and, Red Wall and the Rabble.
Good for you. Great stuff. And if they want to support the inquiry, they go on. It's a GoFundMe.
Yeah, there's a crowdfunder.
It's all on your website.
Yeah, and it's done well. I think it's raised enough. It's raised more than enough because what we've done is unprecedented, and we know it's another step towards our final step, and that final step will be justice for these children. They've cancelled, just as a last thing. The government keep going on about this ICSA inquiry, this ICSA report.
There's a 2022 report which Alexis J was behind, but
20 recommendations they keep going on about. They've quietly cancelled the recommendations to do with the compensation of survivors.
Really? When did that happen?
A couple of weeks ago. Charlie Peters reported on it.
It just never ends.
They don't care.
Okay.
They don't care.
Miah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching the Winston Marshall Show with Raja Miah. I ask if you want to support the show. Remember, all you have to do is press subscribe. And if you head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk, you've got exclusive videos, content, and ad-free viewing. If you want to watch other episodes I've done on the rape gang scandal, you can watch them here. There are links here. But until next time, be well.